Well, we are back for another episode of You Can't Ask That. I kind of wanted to talk about today because we had mentioned in the resurrection episode, I believe, we had kind of talked about, there's different timelines in the Gospels, but they all kind of towards the end mention what we now coin as the Great Commission, but it was essentially marching orders from Jesus to his disciples.
That's right.
So when we say that, I mean, how would you describe the Great Commission? What is that to you? What is Jesus, in your opinion? What is the Great Commission?
What is the Great Commission? It's the commandment to go and to grow the church, and to do it everywhere that you go. And I preached on this Sunday, so it's interesting that we're talking about this today. So it is the initial commission given to. We interpret it as given to the church as a whole, even though technically it was just made to the disciples. But if you actually read what Jesus says there, he said, "Go and make disciples," and that is the Great Commission. And I'd love to talk about this because I think there's so much that we've missed in the Great Commission as churches. There's probably a lot that we do that is part of it, but I think sometimes there's aspects of it we also forget that I'd like for us to hit on today.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to do is define, and this was actually brought to my attention, right? You drive down the street, especially here in Kentucky, and you'll see 7 churches in a 2-mile stretch. So when we say the church, what are we defining? What is the church?
Yeah, no, actually that's really good because I thought about this week. Anytime we talk about the church, we have to make clear what it is that we're referring to. Usually in context, in conversations that I have, and I imagine it would be the same for you and probably most of our listeners, is that when we talk about the church, we're thinking along the lines of the average American church. And usually we mean like an evangelical church, one that preaches, the kind of the basic gospel truths. Some may not go much deeper than that, but they kind of preach the basic gospel truths from the Bible. And so when we talk about the church, we're not talking about one specific denomination. We're talking about, though, the evangelical church. We're not talking about Roman Catholicism. Now, some would argue that you could throw that in there, but usually in the context, when we say the church, that's not even what we're referring to either. It's usually evangelical Protestant churches.
Okay. So then the Great Commission, would you say, is kind of what the mission of the church, right?
It is what the mission should be.
Okay. Should be. That's good.
Should be, yeah.
All right, so, and the reason I bring up the word mission is I was talking to someone the other day, and when my oldest son, Alec, our producer, when he was, I think, a junior in high school, he was considering military as a career option. He was considering special forces. We had the opportunity to spend 7 days with a group of Navy SEALs, retired Navy SEALs, active duty Navy SEALs. And for 7 days, they put us through a simulated training that would be similar to what the Navy SEAL training would be. These guys are amazing. I was just going to say that, like, you see them, you see the movies about the Navy SEALs and you read the books about the Navy. These guys are top. I mean, they're professional, they're efficient, super intelligent. I mean, the way they go about things.
They're the upper echelon, huh? The best of the best.
Yeah, the best of the best, highly trained. And they were super generous. They were super generous with the time that they spent with us and what they did for. I mean, I came home pretty beat up and sore, but we got a ton of stories on that. But one of the
did you get in fights or something?
Well, they would. So a lot of the stuff we did was revolved around tactical stuff. So we would clear rooms, and we used these airsoft guns to do this. Obviously, we're not going to use live rounds, so we use these airsoft guns. Those things hurt. And they break skin. I mean, like, when you get hit, like, we came home with welts all over. And one of the first things they did is they basically had us stand, like, 15 feet apart and just shoot each other. And they were like, this is what it's going to feel like all week. You might as well get used to it.
Really?
So, yeah. So, but I mean, as a, obviously I wasn't interested. I was too old at this time to think about being a Navy SEAL. But there was people there, Alex's age, that were thinking about that as a career path. And then there were a bunch of people like me in their 40s that wanted to see if they could still hang. But being in my 40s and being a business owner, man, they had I came away with some great takeaways, like just the way they do things, so efficient. So, and that leads me to this kind of story to go along with what we're talking about today. So one of the things towards the end of the week that we would do, we had learned all of these kind of tactical skills throughout this week. We'd learned to clear rooms and basically how to organize a mission and debrief the mission and all that kind of stuff. And so towards the end of the week, we were doing a scenario where we had someone was a hostage. They were basically an airplane had crashed, say, we're assuming, and the pilot was kind of stranded, and he was hiding in this building. And our job was to go rescue him. That was our mission. Now, there was also another group who were, quote, the bad guys, and their job was to try to get to him too, and we were supposed to get to him before they did. So the mission objective was to find the pilot and get the pilot out of there safely. Well, as we're going through and we're clearing rooms, the other team, the bad guys pop up, and we get in this we're just laying down the airsoft guns at each other, right?
And a shootout, firefight.
Yes, total firefight. And we lost, and they, stopped us. And they started yelling at us, but they stopped us, and they were like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you guys doing? They're like, what is your mission objective here? And we're like, well, to find and rescue the pilot. And they're like, what does this have to do with finding and rescue the pilot? At this point, you're just in a firefight for the sake of being in a firefight, and you're just causing casualties. Sometimes you need to back up, refocus on what the objective of the mission is, and reformulate your plan before you can go forward. That has always stuck with me, not only as a business owner, but in life in general. What is the objective of what I'm doing here, and how do I stay focused on it? So my question to you is, has the church lost their mission objective in today's world?
Yeah, probably a lot of churches have, and in the day and age in which we live, Clay, it is hard to stay focused. It really is, because you've got so much, kind of like those bad guys coming at you, to interrupt the goal that you had. You've got so much distraction and voices of opinions and criticism and political correctness and, all kinds of different opinions from members of churches that, within one congregation, you could get 10 different opinions on something, and they're very vocal and very opinionated and very staunch. And so, as a church, sometimes you have to deal with all this coming at you. And when that happens, it is difficult to maintain the proper focus on anything, and just to get sidetracked and distracted. So I would say the church, generally speaking, a lot of churches, this isn't all, but a lot of them probably have lost sight of what the mission is supposed to be. And there's a various number of reasons. I just named a couple. Outside influences. There can also be inward things that we can discuss as well. But I would say yes.
Well, I started to look at some stuff, and I came across, I think it was the Barna Research Group. Now, this was pre-COVID. Of course, now everything today is either pre-COVID or COVID, but this was pre-COVID when this survey was done. But so this was 2019, I think. And the survey basically indicated that 51% of Christians did not either know what the Great Commission is or could not explain what the Great Commission is, or both.
Yeah, that's sad.
So half of the church, quote, membership doesn't even know what the mission of the church is supposed to be.
Wow. Think if you had an army and half of the army didn't know what they were supposed to be doing.
Right.
It's rough.
Yeah. So, and that's what got me thinking about this whole kind of doing this as an episode, because, and then I started to read a few other things, and I came across an article that said, the Western church has become so me-centered that the individual experience of the churchgoer today revolves around what their experience on that service is versus what the actual purpose and mission of the church should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I like that thought, that you brought that up. I mean, so let's take that a step further. Very egocentrical. Okay. So it centers around me, my experience. And of course you want to be careful of that. Churches have also become very centered on the other people, let's say visitors that are coming in, and not that you shouldn't take thought of those, because you absolutely should. But in both of those cases, whether it's just this holy huddle we have inside our four walls, or whether it's we're so seeker sensitive, in both cases you're missing something, and that is a church should be what we call Christocentric. And that is Christ-centered, not me-centered, not them-centered. The Great Commission is a sister commandment to what we call the Great Commandment. And actually, there are two of those. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Secondly, love your neighbor as yourself. But the first part of that, the first commandment, Jesus said, is not to love your neighbors yourself. That's number two. Number one is to love God first, and then kind of let it all flow from that. And so whether it's egocentrism or whether it's seeker-sensitive movement, in both cases, it can be very easy to take the focus off of Christ and to put it on a person. And I think that's a big part of a problem that we're seeing in churches today.
Well, when you start to do that, I think then you start to see all these problems that we're having today. So I read another story of a church it was a pretty good sized church, that they ended up having basically half the church wanted, when they were renovating, half the church wanted to keep the pews, the other half of the church wanted the chairs, and it literally became like team pew, team chair. And this one issue ended up leading to the implosion of this church, and the church is basically now down to like a handful of people that are left in this church, when this was a very large,
probably probably very effective and prominent in their community. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how effective they were, but people knew who they were if they were a large church, right?
Yep.
Wow.
And we're talking about chairs here. We're not even talking about like politics or a scandal and a scandal with leadership or anything like that. We're just talking about chairs and pews,
like what we're going to sit in when we come in on Sundays. Yep. And I think you hear that more and more. Those kinds of stories surface in churches. We're about to go through a renovation ourselves, hopefully at some point this year. And my prayer and my message to the people will be, let's not lose sight of what this is all about. This isn't about, because there is some old furniture in our sanctuary I'd like to toss out. They may toss me out with it. So that's going to be interesting how that plays. Now, I feel like people at our church will handle things graciously. I really do, but you don't always get that in all churches, and that's so unfortunate. So I wonder what God thinks when he looks and he says, okay, so I have commissioned, here's the Great Commission, and here's what Jesus said. All authority, he said this in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and here's the kicker, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And then he went on to say, and I'll always be with you as you go and do that. So if you actually start to break down the Great Commission and what is entailed there, if you were to look at the part where Jesus said, go teach them everything that I have commanded you, certainly when we start fussing over these things that you mentioned, pews versus chairs, colors of the carpet, what kind of lighting do we want to have on stage, and all this superficial stuff. In a sense, you're totally missing the commandments of Jesus are for us to serve, to defer our desires and wants to the betterment of his kingdom, and all these things. And so obviously there's a great disconnect from the Great Commission when we start to hear things like that.
Yeah, I agree. So I started to look, so what's the solutions to this? So, and I came across a pretty cool little article that just talks about 5 things that the church can do to get back to their mission objective, essentially. And I think the first one goes with love your God with all your heart. I think that we should be a worshiping church, not an entertaining church. I think there's a difference there. I think we equate the worship with the music and all of that. But when I looked up the definition of worship, it's basically to be in awe of, to reverence, to show reference to. If we're in awe of God, then it's not just about filling the auditorium with smoke and, having the pastor, the music pastor rocking out in his Air Jordans. I mean, that's entertainment. That's not necessarily worship if the focus is on the entertainment aspect of it. So
That's right.
So, I mean, as a pastor, when you hear that we need to be more of a worshiping church, what comes to your mind with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it goes back to being Christocentric. So there is such a focus put on people in the church that lead the services, whether it's the pastor. In order to be an effective pastor today, they think you've got to look a certain way. If you look at pastors and worship leaders, there's way too many skinny jeans on stage anymore. I mean, you got to look a certain way. You've got to be able to speak a certain way. You've got to be smooth in your delivery. You've got to, you got to fit that modern pastor look and have that feel in order to be effective. And that was not what Paul said. Paul said, when I came to you, he told the Corinthian church, when I came preaching, I didn't come with elegance of words and man's wisdom. He said, I came with a demonstration of the Holy Spirit. People are being healed. People are being saved. Lives are being changed, So we could say that today addicts are being freed from their addiction. Families are being restored. There's proof in the pudding. And so when I hear that, love God and make the worship about him, I think that's what we got to get back to. Quit worshiping the pastor or the worship leader or the prominent figure and start making it about Jesus. Paul also addressed that. He said, some of you follow Peter. Some of you say you follow me. Some of you follow this person and that person. He said, no, we follow Christ. None of those people died for you. So that's what I think of, is we've got to get back to putting the focus on the right person to start with.
Well, I think we've talked about it time and time again on this podcast, but what you see is then if the worship towards the pastor or towards what they're building or taking over this football stadium and turning it into a church or whatever, that Tower of Babylon type scenario, you see the fall every time shortly after. There's a scandal shortly afterwards, whether it be financial, whether it be sexual, something. Yep. There's some type of scandal.
The church is littered with that stuff.
Yep.
Absolutely. There's a documentary. I actually don't like it, even though there's probably a lot of truth to it. There was a guy, he didn't even believe in God. But he said that he found that he could go to these Pentecostal churches, and there's an actual documentary, like the video he made, him and some guy he was with. He would go to these churches that are very charismatic and emotional, and he said, if you ever want to make money in ministry, these are the kind of churches you go to. And he even said, these are they're the most giving churches, and it shows him laying in bed with all these $100 bills that the church had given to him. And I look at that, and I wonder, and Paul said, there are going to be wolves that come in sheep's clothing. There are false teachers among you. And I wonder, when we see all this worship being thrown at a person and they accept it, they don't deflect it. Many of them will accept that type of reverence. Is that what we're looking at? A wolf in sheep's clothing? I don't even like the term reverend, Clay. They call me reverend at the church. I don't even like the term reverend. You know why? Because there's only one person that should be reverenced, and it's not me. Now, reverend is just kind of a common term they use in the church, so I kind of, I don't make up too big of a fuss about it, but I prefer never to be called reverend because I don't want to be revered, right? Which is what that word comes from. I want the focus to be on Christ. So,
okay. Well, the next one they mention here is that the church should become, or should get back to being, a family bonded church. That church was never meant to be done alone. And I think that's probably a post-COVID issue here, right? Everything went online during COVID. There's a lot of, I'm seeing more and more articles on churches that are just kind of staying online now. They felt like they were getting, I don't know, more of a message delivered or whatever. But in the process of doing that, are we isolating people by it being all online? So are we losing the service to others, servicing each other's needs as the early church did? So getting back to being that community that's there for each other and not fighting over chairs and pews. But
right. Well, not only servicing other people's needs, but when it becomes a situation where we just kind of always watch it on TV or on our computers or phones, we're not able to give to the service either. So not only is the church missing out on an opportunity to serve people, but then those people are missing out on the opportunity to not only be served, but then in return for them to serve as well. So I talked to a pastor yesterday, and he didn't have a good answer for this. He pastors of a church. Pre-COVID, they were around 600. Now they run in the 4s. And he told me yesterday, he said streaming is here to stay. And I actually had a Baptist pastor in Norwood, Ohio, tell me this too. He said, his church runs over 100. He said, we stream, people love it. It is what it is. He said, I just do not like it. And I'm starting to hear pastors say this now because it's keeping people at home. But with the technology we have and the way things are and the way people's mind has been conditioned now, it looks like streaming is just going to be, and there's good parts of it too, don't misunderstand, but it looks like it is here to stay. And we're going to have to figure something out about it. And it's not just, can we include the people that watch our services? Can we include them on our church attendance so we can show bigger numbers? No. It's not about that. What I'm saying is, how do we get those people plugged in, actually physically, literally serving the way Jesus told us to? I don't know.
Well, so one of the things that also stood out to me when we spent that week with the SEALs was they are, obviously they're highly trained people, and that's what they rely on. So they actually have a saying that you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. So to keep that mission objective of the church, we need people to be in the church serving each other, but we need to train them up in the way that they should be serving each other so that when difficult situations arise, they fall to their level of training and their reliance on each other and God.
But if you don't ever see them, that's hard to do.
Right.
So, yep. Right on. I'd be curious to see what the other 3 points are.
So you would think they would be obvious, but obviously. So the third one is a Bible. It should be a Bible teaching church. You would think that would be obvious, but I've sat through countless sermons and countless Bible studies where a Bible verse is plugged in so that they can call it a sermon, but it's completely out of context, and it's just a motivational speech, and it's designed to make people just feel good, which we've talked about this before, but I think actually does more harm because the message is kind of like, here's the Bible verse, Jesus is going to do this for you. Call it prosperity preaching, call it what you want. And then they leave church thinking, great, all my problems are going to be solved, and that's not at all what the Bible says is going to happen. You just now have a comforter to get through these situations. That's right. And then I think it actually ends up turning people even further away from the church, in my opinion.
Yep. Nope. Enough said on that. That's absolutely true. So we see that a lot.
And then the fourth one is that we should be a ministry-minded church. And this one really emphasizes beginning in Acts 2 and through the book, we read of the disciples meeting one another's needs, serving, sharing, even sacrificing their own prosperity. Collectively, the church ought to be sure that no member is left behind hurting, neglected, or destitute. Individually, it ought to be our desire to do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers.
Yeah, so I've got some thoughts on this. So a lot of times, there's all kinds of different churches out there. Take my church. Right now we would be considered a smaller congregation. We're growing. We're having consistent, steady growth, which is good. And hopefully there's a lot more to come. Right now, what we can do may not look like what another church that has more people that are qualified in different areas, that what they can do. And sometimes there's this mentality when you get into church, we want to do 100 different ministries. The problem is, really, we don't have the people to do those, or at least to do them well. So we got 100 ministries that are sloppy and that create a bad look for the church. They're not as effective, near as effective as they could be. Or do we want to take the 2 or 3 things that we do well, build on those, and then start training people for these other areas that we want to grow in? And so I think it's important so just give me the headline of that point again, if you would.
Be a ministry-minded church.
Okay, so we do want to be a ministry-minded church, but we've got to stay in the lane that God has called us to. So right now, for example, we're growing our music ministry. Okay, tomorrow, or the next time we have church service, we're not going to have a big band up on stage. We're just not. But we're working toward that end, right? But if that's what you expect from our church today, then you're gonna be disappointed, because we're not going to have that. Now, this time next year, is that the goal, or hopefully before that? But just for example, yeah, absolutely, that's the goal. We're going to work toward that. Same way with working with kids and senior adults and all kinds of things. So you have to be a ministry-minded church. If you just dive in without the proper training, and this goes back to training, and this goes back to the Great Commission, right? Which is what we're talking about. Make disciples. When you make disciples, that's not a half-hour sermon on Sunday morning and that's it. That's not disciple making. Disciple making is doing life with people, teaching them, serving alongside them, showing them the best methods to serve, and then ultimately the goal is for them to take it and do it themselves. And so I think when we talk about being ministry-minded, we've got to keep that in mind. But I think probably more the point of that is, don't be too self-focused, but be ministry outward focused. Wouldn't you say I think that's probably what they're saying?
I do, and I think the training is a big one with that, because I think you see a lot of people who make the decision, okay, I'm gonna turn my life over to Christ, and they come forward, or whatever the protocol is in their church, for them to make that decision public, or however they acknowledge it, and then it's like, okay, great, good luck, call me if you need anything.
Yep, exactly.
Instead of really training them, because I know growing up in the churches that Granddad used to preach, right, there was oftentimes a series of classes sometimes between the time they would actually make a decision versus the time they were baptized, and this is what all of this means. So there's, I think, that missing now, that more of that, okay, this is now, let's start kind of gearing you up towards how to understand, how to read the Bible, how to, all these different things that come into play. But sometimes it jumps to the complete extreme where it's like, great, welcome to the church. I'm going to put you on 7 committees, and I'm going to have you doing this. And then a month later, they're burnt out, and they can't keep up, and they're,
Exactly.
So,
yeah. So Max Lucado wrote a book called Cure for the Common Life. And in it, the whole point of it is the cure for living a common, average, boring Christian life, so to speak. But he also makes this point. If you put people in ministries to which they are not equipped, what's going to happen is you're going to find that they get burnt out really, really fast. And you're going to have a church full of burnout. Now, our next episode's actually, we're going to talk about pastors, right, leaving the church. So some of this will come up. But you're going to have a church full of burnout people. I was taught when I was raised that the need necessitates the call. I think that's only true to a point, because if there is a need for a worship leader, but the person you have to sing can't carry a tune in a bucket, great example. I didn't want to point you out, but you did it for me. That's probably not going to be the best fit. I'm not going to have anybody teach a Sunday school class just because we have to have a Sunday school class. I want somebody at least that can that can kind of go through the Bible and do it some justice, you know. So then it's my job then to train the people to do that. And it's the church's job to train people. So I think what we're missing is the training aspect. And I think it keeps coming back to that. In the Great Commission, go and make disciples. Go train people the way I've trained you. So I've trained you, you train them, then they'll train, you know, and it kind of keeps going and growing from that aspect. So I don't know. It's tough, man. It's tough. Growing a church is tough business because you've got people on one side that are like, man, we got to do this, and this. And they want to rush the process. You got other people on the other side that they're comfortable. They don't want to do anything, you know? So, because we like our holy huddle, God bless us for and no more kind of mentality. And, you know, I try to land somewhere in the middle with that. We want to grow healthy, steady, and just be effective in what God has called us to do. So,
well, and the fifth one, I think the fifth one, which I'll mention here in a second, I think the other four are kind of a culmination and combined to create this fifth one, which is that we should be, as the church, a soul-winning church.
That's it. That is it. And we have gotten away from that. This is what I love. I know you were raised in the Southern Baptist Church. This is what I love about the Baptist Church. They put an emphasis on soul winning. For all the things that we could say good or bad about different denominations, the Baptist Church does a great job on putting an emphasis on that. And I think modern churches have we've gotten away from that, man. And honestly, Clay, guess what? You win souls, that's going to solve some of these other problems we're talking about. Mm-hmm. If I need some men on my board, let's say, that are business minded, guess what? If I start winning some business minded people to Christ, that's going to solve the problem. If I start reaching musicians for Jesus, guess what now? Now I've got some musicians to sing, right? And to play and stuff. So soul winning cures a lot of deficiencies that we could have in the church. Of course, the main purpose of soul winning is to get people to meet Jesus. So,
and I think and you may disagree with me on this, but I think one of the best ways to do that, in my opinion, is to make sure that your life and the way you live your life as a Christian is an example for those that are not Christians, mm-hmm. that they can see that there is something different about what radiates inside this person. And even though they're struggling, or even though they're in different situations, there's still a light that shines through them because they've chosen to live their life through Jesus versus the world. And that, I think, as a husband, as church leaders, as spouses, whatever, you know, if we live the way that Jesus has taught us to live and the Bible has taught us to live, I think people take note of that. I think because people get so caught up in their struggles. And like we've said 100 times, you're either coming out of a struggle, you're in a struggle, or you're going to be in a struggle.
Yeah.
But when you have Jesus to turn to, you can make your way through the struggle. You know, there's that old saying, right, that he's not going to put you in any situation that you can't come through or whatever. And I hate that saying, because if we didn't have to, if we could get through the situation on our own, we wouldn't need Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So the situations that we can't get through, that's when we do need Jesus.
Absolutely. Another old saying that comes to mind is your life may be the only Bible some people read.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
So I think it goes right along with what you're saying.
Yeah, so
it sounds like we got company. We got a live audience. We do have a live studio audience here today.
This episode's recorded in front of a live audience. But do you? So I mean, I'm with you from the beginning when we talked about. I think the church has lost its mission focus, mm-hmm. and I think, but it's not too far gone that we can't get it back.
Absolutely, no. And I think that's the great thing with God. There's always that second chance, third chance, fourth chance, and on and on. There's always the hope of redemption and to change, the results that we're seeing if we will get back to scriptural, running a church the biblical way. And that starts with going back to the Great Commission. So let's close with this. Jesus used the word pas in the Greek. Okay, and I preached on this Sunday. In the Greek, he used the word pas, which means all. First thing he said was pas authority, or all authority. And all there literally means all, not some, not part, not most of, everything and everyone. It's all inclusive. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Number one. Number two, go make disciples of all nations. Okay, and I explained to people, God loves people everywhere. That means people that are different race than you, people that dress different than you, people that smell different than you, right? God loves those people too. So then he says, then go teach them all commandments. That was the third one. All the commandments. And I think this is where the church really misses it, is because we want to pick and choose which things we want to talk about because we don't want people to feel a certain way, or we don't want to offend a group of people. Jesus said, go teach them everything that I've taught you. And then fourthly, he said, I will always be with you. And so if we would get back to that commandment, that directive from the Lord, I think we would, and really do it. Not say, well, we're going out into our community and we're doing this, but then when they come to church, they're not hearing the gospel preached. Well, what good is that doing? We've got to go to all people, because Jesus has all the authority no matter where we go. We've got to preach all of the Bible, not part of it. And I think we will start to see, and I hope that we see revival once again in our communities and in our country. There's a desperate need for that, Clay. And the truth is, if the church isn't going to do what it's called to do and reach out to people that are dying and in their sins and are going to have eternal separation from God forever, like, this is a big deal. This isn't like, take it or leave it. No, this is a big deal. There's a lot at stake here. And, we need to really revisit that Great Commission in our churches. And it's sad that we're even having had this conversation. It has the church. That means a lot of churches around have failed. Has the church lost its mission? If one church had lost its vision, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But because it happens all the time, that's why we had to even hit this topic.
Well, and that's because there's, the blame game kicks in, right? Well, people don't want to go to church today, or, there's all these polls that say most people classify themselves as non-religious nowadays. People are searching. People are always searching.
People still need hope.
And, I challenge all the churches to look at yourself. Are you mission focused, or have you lost mission objective? If so, how do you get back on track? Mm-hmm. So, we have to do that daily in our lives and our business and everything else. The church is no different. They should be doing it as well.
Absolutely. So, be like the Navy SEALs.
There you go.
Right.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Well, we will end there. If you are enjoying this podcast and our YouTube show, please subscribe, like, comment. Again, if there's topics you want to hear us talk about or have questions, I would love to get those as well. So,
I have a question.
Okay.
How'd you get that coffee stain on your head?
I'm a big fan of Mikhail Gorbachev.
Mikhail Gorbachev.
No, it's one of those birthmarks that I didn't know I had until I lost my hair. So,
I hope that never happens to me. I don't want to know what's up there.
You got a good head of hair, but you don't have four kids either.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, but all right, till next time.
All right, brother.
Bye.